Thank you for joining us. My name is Stephen Nichols, and I'm the Director of Business Development for Mission Critical Systems. You can contact me with my information below there, or find us at SharePointBusinessConsulting.com. Our company is based here in Denver, Colorado. We do work with a number of industries building out SharePoint sites really all over the country. But I wanted to talk today about a specific industry, the oil and gas industry, that has had a lot of interest recently, and talk through the ways that some of those oil and gas companies are using SharePoint to become more efficient and effective and to solve some of their business problems. So if you're new to SharePoint, SharePoint is a Microsoft collaboration portal. It solves issues with document management, content management, workflows, business intelligence, which we'll show today, project management, and portals, things for clients, investors, that kind of thing. But it's a very flexible platform that can be customized to the specific needs of the company and the industry. So what I'm going to show today is going to be an example of how one fictional business used SharePoint to solve some problems. But keep in mind that SharePoint is flexible enough that it can really be adapted to solve any problems that you might have around collaboration or content management or the things that I mentioned a second ago. So I will show this site, and I think it's a great example of how business could use SharePoint to become more effective. So this is the home page for the site. You're going to see the first big element on it is, of course, a very large map. But I also have over here graphs. This would be data that's coming from any kind of SQL database you have, or any data that could be put into a SQL database. I also have a list of internal wells, and I can click on these to get more information about each of these wells. I have a document library for external wells there, and I have a large calendar with several different types of appointments to that. So let's start with the calendar. This calendar is what's called the SharePoint calendar overlay. So if I click on this, it shows me a larger example of that, but you'll see it's actually drawing information from calendars that pertain to each of the different departments in the company. So if I click on land, for example, it's only going to show me the land events that are coming up. So this company said they had an issue with making sure things weren't scheduled on top of one another. So we put all of the events for all of the different industries, or all the different departments rather, into the same calendar and put that on the home page so that it was easily visible and accessible for everyone there. Now the big element on this page, of course, is the map. And you'll notice that I have this would be an interactive map. This is kind of a mock-up of what it would look like. We've actually had several companies request this of us, so I thought it was a good example to bring up. Each with little drops of oil, and I've been told that's the wrong color, but I wanted them bright and flashy, so they're red oil. In any case, if you hover over each of these drops, you're going to have a pop-up window that's going to have information about that particular oil well. So I have Coyote 2, which is a fictional name of a fictional oil well, of course. The operator there is Jackson. Status is permitted. Interest is 24%, and it gives me some information there. Now, this pop-up could really contain any kind of information you like. If you wanted, production data, if you wanted lease information, whatever it is you'd like to have pop up there, we can have that show up in the SharePoint site and have it searchable with a web part like this. But in this case, I'm just going to click on Coyote 2, and that's going to take me to a page that is dedicated to content about that specific well. So here I have a picture, I have a map, and I have some production data too that's coming into it. And then I also have things like internal documents, and we'll get into that with some depth. And then also a discussion board over here, some external documents that might be emailed into the SharePoint site, and just all the information that pertains to the Coyote 2 well. So to start with the discussion, let me click on one of these topics. First of all, I can click on New Discussion to create a new conversation if that's what I want to do. But instead, I'm going to click on this, a conversation that's already going on. And you can see the first comment was made here about some information. This could be, there's something that needs to be replaced on the well, or a lease issue, or any kind of conversation around that well that needs to be had with the company or with investors or whoever's going to see this web part. I also have some replies to that. This is a reply that came from a Galaxy S4 phone, and that's something that SharePoint does very well. It's a very mobile-friendly application that can allow you to continue a conversation as you walk away from your desk and have your iPad in your hand, or your telephone, or whatever you're using to connect to the SharePoint site. So you're able to respond to that. But let's say I walk away from it, and I want to know if anyone responds too. I want to follow this thread of conversation. Then I can do this. I can click on the ... right next to it. Click on Alert Me, and then I can ask SharePoint to send me an email or a text message whenever someone makes a comment on the SharePoint site or on this comment this particular thread. And that's nice to be able to track, especially if it's a pressing issue. Here, I'll go back to the previous page and go back to this. Now, the conversations, the discussions you create can also involve things like pictures, or they could be videos. Here's an example of a YouTube video that's been put into one of these threads. So you have some flexibility too, and it's not just a kind of a boring text box. You can actually do some design work to have the question more interesting, or to show does this fence line need to be moved, or does this part need to be changed out, and show a picture as opposed to just describing it with words. So that's discussions, very useful. I also have internal documents right here, and I'll go into this. Document management is actually one of the big drivers for going into SharePoint. I think it's because everyone is kind of mad at their file share, because the file shares get very unruly very quickly, and SharePoint has some tools for controlling that. The first of which is metadata. Now, you're probably used to saving things into a file share where the name of the document is very, very important, right? Completion report, and then a number afterwards, so there's a date perhaps involved with it or something like that. Well, with metadata, the name of the document is less important, and the folder in which the document is stored is less important, or even not important at all. You don't really need to worry about that, because I can create custom metadata fields. So in this case, I created a category field, and I have several different options for completion, drilling, AFE, land doc, permitting, the different departments that would be involved in each of these documents. So if I click on the drop-down there, I'm able to choose, I'm only interested in documents from AFE, completion, and drilling. And click Close, and that will limit the documents that are showing up. So you can see how that would very quickly take a large number of documents and hone it down to the specific documents you're looking for. I can also do things like sorting things alphabetically, and in this way I can very quickly get to what I'm most interested in. Now, once I've found the document, I can do other kinds of things to share it. So you're probably used to also taking a document, a report, and emailing it out to everyone as an attachment. Now, there's an obvious downside to that, and that's when I send out a document, or I send out the new final budget, final budget, and then I realize the second I hit the send button that I screwed something up, and I need to go back and send a V1, V2, V3, V4, all these different versions of the same documents to the same 6 or 7 people. The same problem comes when they make their edits to the budget and they send it back to me, because then I have to go through and find 6 or 7 different copies of this file and aggregate those changes into one big copy. And the collaboration there is just terrible. It's just very hard to use. So what we use instead are links. This is a link to the document, and I can email this out as opposed to emailing out the actual the actual document. What that allows you to do is when I send this out to Jack and Pete and Sam, they all open up the same document, and they're all able to make edits to that. And they're editing the original document as opposed to editing copies of it. I can also click on the Share button here, and I can send it specifically, or I can give someone access to the document and send it to them, send them an email, and let them know they now have access to it. And I can limit it so that they can edit it, or they can only view the document. So maybe someone in another department, I don't want them to screw up my data or whatnot. Well, they just need to look at it, so I can just limit their access to it that way. Now, of course, the question is, if you have 4 or 5 different people looking at the same document, doesn't that cause a problem? Because they're all wanting to open up the same document. So Microsoft solves that problem in 2 ways. The first way is you can enforce check-in and check-out. And what that does is it makes the first person who opens up the document has the document checked out, and they're able to work with it. And everyone after them who tries to access the document is going to have to only look at a read-only copy of it, or they're going to have to wait until the document has been checked back in. And of course, it'll say who has the document checked out, so they can send a quick email over to Pete and say, hey, are you finished with this? Would you mind checking it back in? Now, that's one option. The other option is what's called simultaneous editing. Now, with some limitations, you're actually able to go through and edit the same document at the same time as a colleague is editing that document. So 2 people can make changes to the same Word document, to some extent the same Excel document, a OneNote document, PowerPoint, things like that, at the same time if SharePoint is the backbone. Now, like I say, there are some limitations to that, so please contact me if you're interested in more information about that, because that does require a conversation. But it is a very useful functionality that a lot of companies are really enjoying being able to use. So document management is a very important part of SharePoint. Now, the thing is that some people just don't want to fool around with the metadata, and I don't blame them. And in that case, and actually most cases, people just use search. Searching in SharePoint, and you'll see I'm typing up in the search bar. Searching in SharePoint is very powerful. You can actually search in the same way that you'd be able to search for, documents on like Bing or something like that. So I'm typing in Coyote 2, and it's going to give me an example of all the different results that come up for Coyote 2. So I have at the very top a web page, right? That's the thing that I was most recently looking at. So SharePoint makes the assumption that's what I'm most interested in. I also have a data sheet that uses Coyote 2 within that data sheet. And that's interesting because it's actually reading the content of the document to see if that's interesting for me and pulling those results up. And then you'll see conversations that have been made involving Coyote 2, and you'll see other kinds of documents. And really a lot of things come up for that. But the order of these results is very intelligent and intuitive, and you see a nice little preview in most cases to show what the document looks like, and it's very easy to do that way. But let's say that I search for something and I have a huge database with 10,000 documents and I have 10,000 results, and what I want isn't showing up. Well, SharePoint has a few tools for honing down the results of the SharePoint search results to actually find what you're looking for. The first thing is over here, I have result type, and I can choose Excel documents or PDF documents, web page, Word documents, whatever's interesting to me. So I'll choose PDF, and it's going to show up these documents that way. I can also choose the modified date. I'm only interested in documents that were modified on Tuesday or Wednesday or within the last week or the last month or whatever it is. And there's some slide bars and whatnot to be able to hone the results that way too. Or I can choose the author. So SP admin is me, Nick2533. That's another person on the account. I can choose who created that document and hone down the results to find what I'm looking for even faster. So search is a big feature. We've actually had several oil and gas companies adopt SharePoint primarily for search because they have an issue where they've acquired a company and a new server walked in the door that has all the data about that company's wells, and they're all, of course, new to this, so they're trying to find historical data for a well that's 30 years old, and no one remembers the name of the thing. They don't remember hardly any details about that. Well, in that case, we're able to actually crawl that server without uploading the content into the SharePoint site, and the search results from right here can include the content from that other server and mix them in with the SharePoint server so they're all showing up on the same screen. And that's a very powerful searching tool that a lot of companies have got a lot of use out of. Let me go back to the oil and gas site that we'd created. I guess the next thing we'll talk through is the land department. Each department's page might be for internal use only. So land employees need to collaborate among one another, and they want that collaboration to be behind the curtain so the rest of the company can't see what they're working on, or it's not important for them to see what they're looking on. So that it might be an internal department level page, or you might have an external department page. So in the case of human resources, human resources gets, I'm sure, very common questions, forms, content that people need to see outside of their department. And we're able to create a page that exposes that information out to the rest of the company. Likewise, pages could also be created to expose information out to clients or to investors or to other kind of partners or whoever else is involved with the business. And you can limit the content they're able to see to just what you want them to be able to see, so they can see their production data, their financial data, or whatever is important to them, but they can't go through and start mucking things up, of course, either too. So in this case, we have a land department page, and it's kind of a mix of things, but we'll go through the functionality for that too. I have a conversations web part. That's the first thing to see in the top left-hand corner there, and that's very similar to what you had on the Coyote 2 page that we created. I also have a project schedule that I'll get into in a little bit more depth. I have documents, which you're already familiar with, and I'll just go in here quickly, and I will filter this down to wells. In this case, that was the metadata that I created. And by the way, you can have multiple metadata fields, so you can have 4 or 5 different things if you're interested in that. So I'll choose that. And then the last thing on this page is going to be a calendar. And you'll see this doesn't look very much like a calendar, of course. It just has end dates, and it's not in a grid view. If I click on Land Calendar, it actually shows me the whole grid view of it. It's just that we use that truncated part when we're trying to take up as little space as possible. Now, you'll also notice that this data right here, these 3 events, are showing up on the home page in this overlay calendar. these 3 events are right there as well. And if I click on this and then I filter down to just the land content, it's only showing me those 3 events. So that's very nice. You're able to have the content surface on several different pages throughout the site without any kind of limitation. Now, let's say I'm interested in this content and I work for the land department, and I like this is great, but I really want to not open up the SharePoint site whenever I want to see the calendar. Well, so with SharePoint, I can click on the Calendar tab at the top here and choose Connect to Outlook. And when I do that, the SharePoint calendar shows up as another calendar listed right there. And here are my events, which are at 10 o'clock at night, apparently. So you're able to extend it into Outlook, and it's one of many integrations into Microsoft Office. I'll show another one for document management. This is a Word document, of course. If I want to save documents into the SharePoint site, the easiest way to do that is using a tool called OneDrive. So I'll hit File, Save As. I'm going to scroll up to my favorites here and choose the OneDrive account. And this actually gives me access to each of the document libraries that I have. So that's another way that that SharePoint integrates with Microsoft Outlook, or Microsoft Office, rather. We also have a lot of requests for project management tasks, and I'll show that here in a second, but you're able to get those project management tasks into your Outlook and into your handheld device, your phone as well, so when you're in the field, you can check off tasks as you're doing them, and it updates the project calendar back on the SharePoint site, back in the office. So there's a lot of work, there's a lot of ways that Office and SharePoint work in tandem, and it's kind of interesting that you're able to do so much with SharePoint without ever opening up a browser. Let me get back into the land department page, though, to show what the task looks like. So we're back here. That's the calendar feature. This is showing a couple of tasks that are due. In this case, this is just the tasks for the land department that are past due. You'll see them in red there. If I click on this, it'll show all of the tasks that are due for the land department. And I have a nice timeline there that kind of graphically represents where things are at. Now, this timeline, of course, could be, or this task list could be for a specific project, for a specific department, for a company-wide. It could be quarterly goals or annual goals you're pursuing, or it could be, you know, as you're working on individual projects, you could create pages that are dedicated to just that specific project. And actually, there are a very large number of companies that are using SharePoint as opposed to Microsoft Project for those little projects that they don't really justify the amount of work you need to do to create a project plan on Microsoft Project. So it's a very powerful project management tool. So let's say the timeline is nice, but what I really want is a Gantt chart. Well, I have that. I'm going to show the same tasks, and you can see that's a Gantt chart there. Or let's say Gantt charts are nice, but I'm really more interested in a calendar. Well, that's fine as well. So in that case, I have a calendar view of all the tasks and when they're due. So there's lots of different ways to parse the same information and view that on different pages. So that's a whirlwind tour of what SharePoint can do, but I want to cover business intelligence as well, because business intelligence is definitely one of the more useful features, especially for the oil and gas industry. I have a couple of reports that have been created here, and you'll notice that there are 4 different big parts on this page. There's 1, 2, 3, 4, like that. So if I click on the expand button, which I'm sure is hard to see in this recording, but I can expand that out, and then I can click on the play button to show how the data has changed over time. So that's very useful. This could be data that comes from any kind of SQL database you have. So if you have a production system or a finance system or whatever you have, we can probably get that data into a report like this and make it accessible through a SharePoint page to internal users, executives, investors, whoever's interested in that content. I can also click on this, and it shows well, let me open some more things up. This shows some more information about that. And then here, this is a good chart to go through. This shows the different wells and if they're abandoned, actively producing, injection wells, etc. And you're able to click on the chart and do some manipulation of this. So let's say I'm only interested in wells that are abandoned, active, called methane, converted to oil. So those are only those wells that I'm interested in, and I'm only interested in the category of things that have at least that many. Well, it's going to reduce the number there. So you can see that there's some powerful tools for being able to hone down these reports, and what you end up with is what we call self-service BI, where you're able to create your own reports from the data without endangering the data. So these web parts could be put on a SharePoint page like this and could be manipulated. The date range or whatever context you have for it could be changed, but that doesn't endanger the data that's being drawn from to create those web parts. So if you have investors, for example, that need to see the production data, but you don't want them screwing up the database, that's fine. We can do that, and there's a kind of read-only access, I guess, for those things. So that covers a lot of information for what SharePoint could do for an oil and gas company. I have many more ideas, and we've done many more things for other businesses, and we'd be happy to talk to anyone who has any information or any questions about that. So please do contact us with the information below, or visit our site at sharepointbusinessconsulting.com. Thank you very much for taking the time to join